It, we have Jack Feldman with us, and he is going to be our guest speaker tonight. So Jack, if you could just tell a little bit about yourself, and then.
All right. Hello, everyone. Great to see you all. It would be better to be there live, to be honest with you. I miss the energy between the folks, but this will have to do, and hopefully we can get the message across over here. And my name is Jack Feldman. I'll give you a little intro. I'm a retired manager from the LA Department of Water and Power. Retired 15 years ago. And I got involved with a lot of organizations, as some of you, have. But I got involved with one organization called Water and Power Associates. And their mission is still today to educate the public and the politicians and the media on energy and water issues facing LA and Southern California. And when I came along at that time, 15 years ago, I was the youngest one on the board, executive board. They asked me to put together a website. And I said, well, I don't know how to do it myself. I have a son-in-law who's an IT person. And so what they wanted to do was show the relevance of water and electricity to the growth of Southern California. And I started putting it together 12, 15 years ago. And it's expanded to the point where we have over 20,000 images with historical background. And I'll mention it later on at the end of the program, but everything you'll see here comes from the website. And so I just wanted to give you a little background. And so the question I have is, think about this. Why are we living here in Southern California? I mean, how did Southern California become so populated over the years? What made that happen? And and who made it happen? So what I like to do is talk about, actually it's water. Obviously, you're historians. Water enabled civilization to expand here in Southern California to where we are today. There are a lot of other issues, homeless issues, quality of life issues now, but it's a pretty good place to live, I believe. Our climate, our neighbors, but without the water, no one would be here. And so I want to talk about early water and who was here before us. The Native Americans, the first Europeans to come here, and how they settled the area, what challenges they had, especially with the water quality, and the key players that made it possible for the city, and not the city, Southern California to grow. So with that, let me start this PowerPoint presentation. I hope everyone can see that. So the name of this is Water in Early LA. And first of all, can everyone see this?
No.
You cannot see this?
No.
Okay. Thanks for letting me know.
No.
Let me share my screen. How about now?
There you go.
Thank you. Thanks for the feedback. I would have gone on. All right, there we go. Again, water in early LA. So let's go back. Let me take you back thousands of years. And this is a map that indicates the Native Americans that lived in this area. And as you see here, here's the LA area. I'll try to bring out Calabasas as much as I can. Calabasas is in this area over here. And the first Indians, Native Americans that lived here were the Chumash Indians over 10,000 years ago. We have records of that. And then more recently, about 2,500 years ago, the Tongva Indians came to be, and they were the most populous in this area. And most of these, by the way, the Chumash ran all the way from Santa Barbara down to northern Los Angeles. They occupied that land. They did a lot of fishing. They needed water, but they got it from the streams. The Tongva relied much on the LA River that was out here, and they had 22 villages. And so let's talk about the first European explorers. I want to move on here. And as far as we can tell, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo was the first European to come up the coast over here with 3 ships 50 years after Columbus set his eyes on the new land, 1542. And he was looking for this fabled Northwest Passage up in the north, could never find it. He went up north to as far as San Francisco, missed the bay, came back down here, saw some Native Americans, logged it out. He saw some in San Pedro. He called San Pedro the Bay, the Smoke Bay, Bay of Smoke, because the Indians were putting bonfires. And he stopped at Santa Catalina, and he saw some Chumash Indians there that kind of attacked him. They defended themselves. He was injured by a cut, and he died. He died in Santa Catalina. By the way, it wasn't Santa Catalina at that time. It was named San Salvador after his ship. And unfortunately, his records were lost for 50, 70 years. So they renamed it Santa Catalina. Little known fact. But the first explorer that came here on an expedition by land was Gaspar de Portola. And he came up here and he was looking for a pathway up north to Monterey Bay. And he came here with Franciscan monks, Franciscan fathers, and civilians and soldiers. And the first place he stopped was right here in a place by the LA River. And I'll get into that in a minute. Let me take you back millions of years. Now that we're talking about the LA River and how that helped with the Native Americans. Millions of years ago, the San Gabriel Mountains that you see up here were rising. We had the Santa Susana Mountains, they call them Simi Mountains at that time. You had the Santa Monica Mountains, they were all rising. And at the same time, the snow melt off the mountains, or the rain, came down over here into the San Fernando Valley. There was no place for that water to escape. The San Fernando Valley was actually a lake millions of years ago. And a little known fact is, well, everyone knows this who rode a bike or a skateboard in the valley, that the valley is tilted from northwest down to southeast. So the water is trying to go down this way, and there's no outlet. But basically, after so many millions of years and so many earthquakes, down here by the Narrows is where an opening first came about. And that's how the water came running down and the LA River was formed. And by the way, the confluence of the LA River is right over here, very close to Calabasas. It's the Bell Creek and Arroyo Calabasas Creek. Let's talk about the LA River. LA River, again, had 22 villages of Tongva along the LA River in the very beginning. When Portola came here, he came to a section by Union Station, right in this general area. And his diarist, trying to think of his name, Juan Crespi, you've all heard of Crespi, wrote down that this was a great place for a settlement because you had water in this area. And so he named it not the LA River, but the Rio de Porciúncula. I'm butchering the name, but in essence, it was really El Rio de Nuestra Señora la Reina de los Ángeles de Porciúncula. That was a true name of the LA River. And it was named that because this expedition, the night before, was celebrating the feast of the Franciscans, and that was the name of that feast. So shortened to LA River. Now the LA River, as you know, has dry seasons and wet seasons, and back then it had the same thing. It wasn't a continual run, and it was actually an alluvial river, which means the bed and banks were made of mobile sediment, and the river would change location. In fact, we know from our records that in 1815, it rained for 10 days and 10 nights and flooded the river. And the river changed directions right over here by Linwood, Compton, went all the way down the Bologna Creek and ended up in the Santa Monica Bay. We know that. Geologists know that, not we. And then 10 years later, we know that another flood hit and it changed directions again. And it went back to the San Pedro Bay. And the realization is over millions of years, it went back and forth, back and forth. So 22 villages flourished here on the water. I'm going too fast with this. Forgive me here. When Portola came down here, he came to a village that had 200 Indians right by where Union Station is located today. And they lived right on the river. And the name of the village was Yagna, Y-G-N-A. Now here's a rare map. And what this is a, let me get this out of the way here. This is called a survey map. It's really a photo of a lithograph of the way LA used to look. And Philip de Neve was a governor of California at that time. He planned LA in the mode of the Spanish. Let me get this in laser mode so I can point to this. The Spanish colonialists had a master plan for designing settlements all over the world. They did this in the Americas, they did it in the Philippines, and if you've traveled, which I think many of you have, what you see is the plan has always a plaza, like the LA Plaza. It has a fortified church right there. It has an administration building, and it had streets in a grid system. No different than we found here in LA. The census first census in LA was In 1841, we had 141 people in the city. And by the way, this plan was made in 1781. And the reason that they set up these settlements, and they set one up in Santa Barbara and they set one up in San Jose, was they felt that the church was becoming too powerful, and they wanted to develop a secular village to help support the King of Spain and to help support the soldiers. That's why they set up these settlements. Now, how did the settlement get their water? Well, you can't see it here, but the LA River flows right here in the background. And they got their water from there. And the first water conveyance system they had was none other than the Indians, the Tongva Indians. And they paid these Indians at this point. Unlike the Indians that served in the church, were treated a little more like slaves from the way I read it. These Indians were from the Tongva tribe, were paid in trinkets and barter to bring the water to the village. Now, this is one of my favorite photos. And what you see here is the way Los Angeles looked like in 1850. This is a rare photo that many people believed was a photo taken from a balloon in 1850. In actuality, what it is, it's a photo of an accurate model of the Pueblo of Los Angeles in 1850. And what you see here are the San Gabriel Mountains in the background. You see the LA River winding around Griffith Park, joining the Arroyo Seco from Pasadena area, and coming down over here to where Union Station is today, over here. And this is where the tribe of Indians were located when Portola arrived. And what's fascinating about this is, you see the LA Plaza right here. It was square at that time. It wasn't circular. You see the Plaza Church, this white building right here. This street here is Alameda. This one down here is Main Street, Los Angeles Street, Spring Street. Very similar to what we have today. What you also see is this one building here was known as the Temple Block, not named for a religious temple, but named for a fellow by the name of John Temple, who built the first store in the town of Los Angeles. That was it right there. And by the way, Temple Street runs this way, named after John Temple, who built his first store. And something else. Today's Los Angeles City Hall, 28-story City Hall, sits right here where the Temple Block used to be. What else do we see here? Well, we see these vineyards here. And the vineyards were owned by a fellow by the name of John Louis Vignes. He came here from France, actually the Basque area, close to Spain. And until he came here in the 1840s. The monks were making wine and drinking it right away. They had the standard wine, drinking it, and he came in and he says, wait a second, we do things a lot different in France. And he brought his samplings and he aged the wine, and this became the largest vineyard in the state of California. Little known fact. And by the way, also a street was named after Vignes Street, if some of you have heard that. I like it when streets are named after people. That means they left a mark. They left a mark. So, by the way, there's a connection between Vignes and Calabasas, Miguel Leonis. Miguel Leonis and Jean-Paul Vignes knew each other back then. And back then, the population wasn't that great. 1 out of every 7 inhabitants were from France or Spain, actually the Basque area that straddled both France and Spain. Little known fact. So what we have here, let's go on here. LA became incorporated in 1850, just before California got its statehood. And they did it on purpose because they wanted to be part of the state and they wanted to have a governance. And take a look at the population. What happened here? Between 1840, when they had 141 people, and 1850, 1,610, it's a 10-fold increase in the population of this particular area, LA. And why was a population increase? Well, 2 main reasons at this time. It was a cow town, and they grew oranges that helped provide some miners, and I'll talk to that in a minute. They brought the oranges, by the way, from South America, from some of the churches, and it did quite well in Southern California. All right, so what else do we have? We have a gold rush out here in Southern California. People, little known fact that the first gold discovered in California was not up north. It was in Placerita Canyon, 1843. And a lot of miners came over here, and this town supported them with the oranges and the beef sent up there to feed them. We also had in 1847, we had the Treaty of Cahuenga, the end of the Mexican-American War. And so you had a lot of soldiers who fought in that war, not wanting to go back home, wanting to settle right here in beautiful Southern California. And then, of course, you had that gold rush, that other gold rush up north, brought some people down here too, and I'll get into that. This is a interesting map. It's called a Manuscript Map, and it shows the Zanja Madre. This is a lifeline, actually the first aqueduct, so to speak, of LA. And Zanja Madre means mother ditch, and it brought the water from the LA River. Now the LA River runs over here, but it brought it from, let's say, a mile down here in an open ditch, all the way to feed, to water and provide the nutrients for the village and the vineyards as well down here, farming. There's one problem that they had, though. The problem was water quality issues. And what happened, you had an open ditch, and you had an uncovered ditch, and you had contamination, which led to a lot of problems. Here's one reason right here: washing clothes in Zanja Madre. You had polluters, you had bathers, you had animals, laundry, refuse, everything that can make people sick, and people were getting sick. The water was contaminated, and now the LA Common Council, which is governance at that time, really had to do something about it. They were put under the pressure. And along comes the first hero in our story. This is a judge, William Dryden, that lived between the LA River and the Pueblo. And on his land, there was an artesian well. There was water coming up. It was very clean. And he had the idea that, you know, I can pump this water up and I can put it in pipes and now make sure there's no contamination of the water. So Mr. Dryden, he was a colorful judge, profane tirades all the time, very colorful. He went to the city council and he says, I'll put in a closed pipe system, but you got to give me something in return. You got to give me a 20-year lease on the water rights for this whole area. And the LA Common Council looked at him, thought about it for a little bit, said basically, hell no, we're not gonna give up our water rights for 21 years. So they turned him away. So they went to Plan B. They allowed water carriers now to bring water from further away where the water was clean in the LA River, like Sparklet's door-to-door salesmen. And they also hired these fellows by the name of zanjeros, which were ditch diggers, who not only dug the ditches, but they policed the ditch and made sure that no one was polluting the air. They would cite them for violation. And that worked okay for a while. But then what happened was it worked okay for 3 years until water pollution really became an issue. And so the Common Council went back to Dryden and they relented. They said, okay, listen, if you can build something for us that gives us clean water, do it. We'll give you the 21-year lease. And so Dryden, like any good businessman, he incorporates and he forms the LA Water Company, Waterworks Company, which was the first water company in Southern California, or I should say LA. And what does he do? He builds a water wheel, 40-foot water wheel for that matter. He builds a brick and wood water tank in the middle of the plaza. And let's look at that a little closer. Take a look at this water wheel here. This is a Civil War era picture of a 40-foot diameter water wheel that was put there close to the LA River. And now you would think that that water wheel would carry the water in buckets up to the top, and the water would run down over here. But in effect, the water just turned this wheel and it actually pumped the water up into the pipes at the top, and it ran down here to the bottom. And then it went all the way to an elevated tank in the middle of the reservoir. Here's a 1858 photo. It's the earliest known photo, close-up photo of the Los Angeles Plaza. And what do you see over here? Well, you see, here's your tank, here's your water tank. And from there, you had wooden pipes going to all the houses. What you see also here was the Plaza Church. You see this area here, the Pico House would come in right here, not for another 12 years. This one house over here was one of the first two-story homes belonging to Don Vicente Lugo, who was a Lugo adobe. And I'll show you this again. This is a precursor. It was donated to St. Vincent's School, and it evolved to become LMU University that we know today. This is where it got its start. What else do we see back here? LA River comes all the way in the back. Here's this huge tree. This is called El Aliso. It was the largest tree in the area. In fact, that's why the Tongva Indians they worshiped this tree because they worship living things. This was the largest living thing in the LA area. It was 7 stories high. It had a canopy of over 200 feet across, and by the way, they named Aliso Street after it, which today is the Hollywood Freeway. This is a close-up of the water tank. It's pretty impressive for back then. It's brick and wood, 20 by 40 by 18. Actually, the bottom of the tank was right here. The water was at the top. That way it's cooled, and there was enough pressure to push it down to the homes in the area. And this 3-story building, by the way, was the city's first hospital and also the city's first orphanage and school. It was called Sisters of Charity Hospital. Built around this time, around 1860 back here. And this particular street right here, we're looking north, at the time was called Wine Street, like alcohol wine. And it was renamed Olvera Street, as we know it today, after this Augustine Olvera, who owned this adobe right here. So everything's going fine. We have the water wheel, we have the tank. Everything's going fine for about 3-4 years until Mother Nature reared its ugly head. And we had our first major storm in the area. And what did it do? Well, it knocked down Dryden's big water wheel. It just washed it out. He was pretty depressed at this point. He didn't want to have to deal with this anymore. He wanted to go back being a judge, and he packs up and he leaves. He says, that's enough. I spent too much of my energy on this. And then over the next 3 years, it was tried 3 different times, but by really well-known people in the area. They named one street after Marchesalt. Sansevin was a nephew of Vignes, who had the vineyards. David Alexander was the county sheriff. He was also on the president of the Common Council. So you had all these people building these water wheels and tanks, and with the same results. Every time there was a flood, a big storm, it would flood out. So what did the city council do? And I keep calling them city council, but they're common council called. They went back to Plan B. They went back to their Sparklets delivery guy who brought the water from upstream. And that worked for a while, but 2 different issues came up. Again, the water quality wasn't still consistent, and the cost of the water, these fellows were making a lot of money off these folks who didn't have enough money to begin with. And so there was a lot of problems and a lot of complaints, and I think they had some kind of pandemic going on here. They had smallpox around this time, in addition to the water quality. And so they had to do something. And along comes our hero number 2, Prudent Beaudry. And before I get into Prudent Beaudry, he was bigger than life character over here. This is a great photo of the LA Plaza taken in around 1868, where you again see the Wine Street or Olvera Street. You see the first school and the orphanage. You see, of course, this storage. And this is a great view of the old Plaza Church, which was, by the way, built between 1814 and 1822. It's one of the oldest existing buildings, it still exists in Southern California. Think about that. It's, gosh, it's 200 years old. And then you see something else here. You see these two lights over here were the first two gas lanterns in Southern California. And across the street was a company that started up who turned into the Southern California Gas Company. They were the ones that provided the first gas lights down Main Street. But getting back to our hero here, Prudent Beaudry was bigger than life. He made 5 fortunes in his life. He lost 4 of them. He was a French Canadian, came from a French Canadian family, well educated, went to Europe, got educated in Canada, started many businesses, went to New Orleans. But his claim to fame is he understood how to pump water uphill. And because of that, he became the first real estate developer in Southern California. Now you had Bunker Hill. Most of you know where Bunker Hill is. It was a hill atop looking down at LA. And no one could develop that hill because no one would want to build a house without any water at the top. And it took too much work to get it up there. And Prudent Beaudry bought the land. I think he only bought it for less than $100. Not a lot of money, even back then. Put in some pumps, put up these beautiful Victorian homes, pumped the water up there, made a fortune on that. He also developed different parts of the city. He subdivided and developed. But getting back to our story, I'm kind of going off subject because just some fascinating thoughts about this fellow. He, along with 2 other fellows, John Griffin and Solomon Lazar, they're very wealthy developers, approached the Common Council and they said, look, we know Dryden didn't do the trick. We know the other fellows didn't do the trick, but trust me, I'm going to develop a reservoir up in the hills, up here by where Elysian Park is. And I'm going to put so much water up there, you will never have a problem. And it's going to be clean. And it's going to run down. I'm going to put iron pipes. I'm going to beautify this plaza for you. I'm going to give free water to government buildings. I'm going to put some fire hydrants. But all we want, because they have the money, all we want is a 30-year lease for the city's water rights. Now, the city council didn't wait a second on this one. They accepted his offer. And so what do? They incorporate and develop the LA City Water Company. And it had a lease now for 30 years, from 1868 to 1898. And so what do? They did what they promised. They beautified the plaza. You can see this early picture from 1871. Made it circular, put a fountain in the middle. They constructed this new city reservoir up in the hills. These are the eastern hills. I would say it's northern hills, Elysian Park. They laid 12 miles of iron pipe now. And forget these wooden pipes that leaked and presented problems that they had before. They installed fire hydrants. They had free water for public buildings. They did everything that the people wanted. And let's look at this. This is the first reservoir, large reservoir in the city of Los Angeles. It's called the Buena Vista Reservoir, which, by the way, lasted till mid-century, till the 56, in fact, and was used by the city. And so now Beaudry pumped water all the way up here. And by the way, Beaudry was so famous, they named Beaudry Street after him as well, which we have today. So let's look at the plaza area here. Let's see how it's changed from 1850 till now. What do we see here? Well, we see the circular plaza. We see the St. Vincent School, which again evolved into LMU. We see the old Plaza Church. We see something new here. We see the Pico House and the Merced Theater. The first theater in Los Angeles, only lasted 5 years as a theater. And this is the Pico House. Little background on this. Pio Pico was the last governor of Alta California, which is California today. And when he retired, he owned a lot of land. He owned land everywhere. In fact, he owned almost half the San Fernando Valley. Everything south of Roscoe, other than El Scorpion Ranch, which was evolved into Calabasas, and a little part of Encino, he owned the entire stretch from Roscoe Boulevard to the Santa Monica Hills. And he decided he wanted to retire. And so he sold that land to a fellow by the name of Isaac Lancashire, who came down here from up north. And he had a lot of money. He had Levi Strauss, made Levi's, and some other developers backed him up, and they bought a good chunk of the San Fernando Valley from him for a lot of money back then. Let me see how much they got here. I have it written down. They paid $115,000 for 59,000 acres of land, which was substantial. And what he did with that, he always wanted to build a hotel. He built the city's first 3-story hotel, and he retired here, Pio Pico. What else do you see here? You got a good shot of the LA River in the background, winding its way when it was full. So this is probably in the wintertime. And what else do you see here? You see El Aliso, the huge sycamore tree that the Indians worshipped. And Aliso Boulevard, Aliso Street, I should say, ran all the way this way. And again, in the 1950s, that was converted into the Hollywood Freeway, right along Aliso Street. Now, where is this? Well, this is just a block and a half away from the plaza area. This is called Commercial Street at that time, around 1870. And you're looking east on Commercial Street. This was kind of the business center of LA. You see a lot of horse-drawn wagons. This looks like an old cowboy town. And it was. And little known fact that between 1850 and 1870, 80, LA had the highest murder rate of any place in the United States. Any place. And why? Well, they had hardened criminals come here, again, from the old Santa Fe Trail, the fur trappers. they had all the hardened criminals that were run out of the gold camps up in Northern California. They came down here, down to LA, and this became a wild place. There were lynchings just about every other day from what I read. Wyatt Earp worked down here as a stage driver. Judge Roy Bean, who was, remember the movie Paul Newman? He was head of the LA Rangers. He was down here. You had Kit Carson, John C. Fremont, both visited this place several times. And but the city started to grow, you know, and LA may not be a one-horse town, but it's really a one-river town. And there was a concern, will the LA River provide enough water for the growth of the city? And let's look at what kind of growth we're seeing. You're looking at an 1885 view of Spring Street looking north from First Street. I don't know if any of you know downtown, but I would say that City Hall stands right over here now, right over here. And what you see here, you see a lot of horse-drawn wagons, you see a lot of dirt street, you see a rail here. This is the first public transportation system. One horse-drawn wagons. People would pay a fee to be pulled down here, down the street. But you're seeing it's becoming a real built-up town. Here's a fascinating store. When I first saw this, I always thought it was a topless store right here. Maybe because of this figurine. But this was actually called Hamburger and Sons People's Store, which was the first large department store in the city of Los Angeles. And it came about in the 1880s. It lasted till the 1920s. They moved downtown, and in fact, it evolved into May Company, or May Company bought them out, and it became May Company. Little known fact. And you know, May Company became Macy's, and I think we've seen that. So now the city is growing. Let's take a look at this. Now you see 1889. Great picture showing cable cars now. Look at this, cable cars like San Francisco. In fact, the designer of the cable car system in San Francisco came down here and designed the system in LA. And unfortunately, it only lasted 3 to 5 years, very short time, but it was a great system. What do you see here? I kind of like this gentleman kind of relaxing in the back of this horse-drawn wagon. But you also see a very important church. This is the first Presbyterian church with a Gothic style spire, beautiful. You see another tall tower. I don't know if any of you know what this is. This was the LA City Hall, built in 1888, and it lasted till 1928 when the current City Hall was built. What else do we have here? You see this building in between the church and City Hall. You don't see much of it, but this is B'nai B'rith Temple, and it was the first Jewish synagogue in Los Angeles, built in 1873. Little known fact. What else? We have a commercial building over here. You have a bank. Look at this beautiful architecture that they have over here. The city's first YMCA was this building in this complex, right over here, YMCA. So now you see its city is building, progressing. Look at it now, 1895. Now, what are we looking at? We're looking at 2nd Street looking west towards Bunker Hill. We got rid of the cable cars, and now we put electric streetcars right here. This is Los Angeles railway system, lasted a long time. I think Huntington bought it out later on in the early 1900s. And things were going wonderful in the city of Los Angeles. Beautiful city. Look at this, the clothing of the folks. Everyone was formal with hats, beautiful dresses. Horse-drawn wagons are sharing the streets with streetcars. Cars didn't come about for another 10 years or so, 8 years. And what's happening here? Well, why is a city growing? Well, I would venture to say the #1 reason was a transcontinental rail link. And what you had was you had a transcontinental railway that came from the east to San Francisco, and from San Francisco to LA. It still costs about $125 per person for someone to come from Chicago or New York to live in LA, but that was still too much. But what happened is a second railway came called the Santa Fe, and it came all the way to Los Angeles. And now, because of competition between the first one, which was Pacific Railway, and Santa Fe, the price went down from $125 a person to $15 a person, which was manageable at that time, certainly manageable today. And so people were finding out about LA. LA is a good place to live. Why? There was also an oil boom here. Mr. Edward Doheny discovered oil around this time, right where Belmont High School is located today, not too far away, just by downtown. So industry is booming. What else was going good? Agriculture. The weather was great for agriculture. You saw the vineyards, oranges were great, and now they had refrigeration now on these trains, and they can export oranges out to other places, all the way out to Florida, maybe. And of course, the weather was a #1 selling point here in Southern California in the 1890s. And tourism was up because prices down, and people were using the telegraph and later the telephone. Here's the telegraph office. Interesting. They're communicating with their relatives back east, saying, you got to come out here. This place is growing. It's booming. Yeah, but there's still a legitimate concern now as to, will the LA River now sustain the growth? Because it's not steady, so to speak. So, two big issues: sustainable water supply, LA River, and there was another issue. Remember, the LA Water Company had a concession to the water from 1868 to 1898, 30-year lease, and it's coming up. And now there's an opportunity to take over the water rights and give it back to the people, because as all companies do, the water prices were coming way up there as there was a shortage of water. So along comes, LA Water Company coming up. Along comes another character in the story. His name is Fred Eaton. Now, Fred Eaton was an interesting fellow. He went to work for the LA Water Company that we just talked about, that Beaudry started, and he moved up really fast. At age 19, he was the superintendent. And later on, he was a self-educated engineer. He left that company. He became the city engineer in LA. He's well known for putting in Pershing Square, actually, he's well known for putting in the first major sewer system in the city of Los Angeles. He figured out a way to take the sewage all the way out to the Santa Monica Bay and dump it in Santa Monica in the ocean, Pacific Ocean. He was known for that. But he also came from a well-to-do family. His father was one of the founders of Pasadena. In fact, well known, if any of you know Eaton Canyon in the San Gabriel Mountains, that's his father. But in 1898, he ran for mayor. He ran for mayor of the city of Los Angeles. It was a 2-year term at that time. And his platform was, we want to get the water back in control of the people, take it away from the water company that was gouging us in high rates and poor reliability. And again, that water company had a lease from 1868 to 1898. And by the way, water company wasn't about to give up their franchise. They were going to fight LA tooth and nail on this one. But in order to buy them out, they needed to pass a bond measure, and it was an easy sell to the people of Los Angeles. They were able to get almost $2.1 million bond measure passed 8-1 to buy off the LA Water Company. Only one problem is LA Water Company didn't want to let go. It went to 4 years of litigation before the LA area regains control of their water. Interesting chapter in LA history. So let's move along here, and you recognize a man on the right, William Mulholland, and the man on the left is Frederick Eaton when he was a little older, a little more mature, I should say. And as a mayor, once he became mayor, Fred Eaton says, I've got to start my own LA Water Company. We're taking over the water system. In 1902, city took over. And the best man to run it is William Mulholland, who, when I was superintendent of the LA Water Company, I hired as a ditch digger. And he knew everything there is to know about the distribution system. We don't have any maps. He's got a great memory, self-educated young man, a brilliant man, and he became the head of the Los Angeles Water Department in 1902, William Mulholland. This is a true picture from a balloon, not a fake picture, not a model of the way LA looked like in 1887. And I'm just showing you this because LA River, when it flooded, it flooded. Look at the LA River here near downtown LA. It was spreading out, causing all kinds of problems. The LA Plaza is that one circle you see right there. And you see how the sprawl is. LA went all the way to the LA River. Now it's going down south and west. And when this picture was taken in 1887, the population of LA was 20,000 people. But you know what? In a very short time, population of LA, as we saw the spurt, grew faster than any other region of the country. Broke a record by 1900, it went up to over 100,000. But let's look at some more. I love these pictures showing how LA now has evolved and is growing. Here's a 1905 picture of looking north on Broadway. This tower here was at City Hall I was talking to you about, built in 1888, stayed till 1928. Look at these beautiful street lights. Now you see horse-drawn wagons, electric streetcars, and now you see cars. This is a woman driving an electric vehicle, which was a vehicle of choice by women at that time. They didn't have to deal with cranking up the case of a regular car. This was quite common back then. I never knew that when I first studied this several years back. Look at this beautiful building here. It's called the Cummings Building. This picture is 1905. This building still stands today on that corner. Broadway and 4th Street. We're looking north. Look at the city. Look how it's growing here now. And again, I love the spires. I love the, and I'm sure you can appreciate the architecture here. This is Spring Street looking south at 1st Street. And to get a bearings, this Hotel Nadu was the first 4-story building in LA. It was the first building that had an electric elevator. I thought that was neat. And what's there now? The Times building, the iconic Times building that no longer is producing newspapers, sits right here on the southwest corner of First and Spring. But let's look at the population boom, 1850 to 1900. Let's do a quick review here. 1850, 1,600 people. Look at it go up in a very short time from 1850 to 1900. That's amazing. I don't think that's been seen before. Only problem is LA River. LA River can sometimes get dry, folks. And now you've got over 100,000 people. The city is still growing. What to do about it? We've got an answer for you. Back to Fred Eaton, mayor of the city of Los Angeles. When he was a young man, he went fishing with his father up in Owens Valley. And what he saw was all this water melting from the Eastern Sierra and melting down the Owens River, flowing into a desert and evaporating in the desert heat. He saw that, and he said he always thought there was an opportunity. He, being an engineer by training, and he was concerned about getting things accomplished, but he wasn't sure whether we can bring that water down to LA. So he asked the chief engineer of LA, the water department, William Mulholland, to go up there, check it out. This is Mulholland, by the way, in the car. Check it out and let us know if it's possible to bring the water from the snow melt of the Eastern Sierra. And William Mulholland came back, said, you know what? It doesn't take a brain surgeon. We can figure this out. Self-taught engineer. William Mulholland, I got to tell you, never went past 5th grade in Ireland. He was born in Belfast. He jumped on a ship, came to the United States, worked for his uncle in the lake area, northeast, went around Panama by land, came up to San Francisco, rode into LA on a horse, and became really an icon. And there was a tragedy in his life as well, which we can briefly talk about. But William Mulholland says, I can do it. So they went to the Water Board of Commissioners, who was a governing board of the water department and close to the city hall. And they convinced them that they could do it, but they said, it's going to take some money. It's going to take probably $1.5 million to study it further, and $20 to $30 million at that time. We're talking about 1907 or so, to build that 200-mile pipe to get water from Owens Valley. Now, here's where the conspiracy theories come, and you see the movie like Chinatown, and there have been 20 books written on this. But this is true. This man over here was a president of the board, Water Board of Commissioners. His name, Moses Sherman. And if anyone knows anything about history, Moses Sherman developed some rail lines and on Santa Monica Boulevard, all the way to Santa Monica. Wealthy man, made money in transportation. But he was also involved in partnership with Harrison Gray Otis, who formed the LA Times, another wealthy entrepreneur. And Otis's son-in-law, Harry Chandler. And the three of them, I think there was one other fellow, were businessmen together. And they knew now that to bring water into LA, it would first come through the San Fernando Valley. And they saw an opportunity here. They had some inside information, as people on Wall Street have today, but this is over 100 years ago. And they said, you know what, we're going to buy some land in the San Fernando Valley. And we know where that water is coming, and we're going to make a fortune. So they formed a Land Syndicate. They called it the Los Angeles Suburban Home Company. And they went to the biggest landowner down there. Who was that? Lancashire, who owned half the valley. And so they bought most of the land from Lancashire. Actually, Lancashire's son-in-law was Mr. Van Nuys, who married Lancashire's daughter, and he owned part of that. So they bought 47,000 acres of land for $2.5 million, having this inside information. So that is the truth. That's what happened. And so in order to get the money to build the LA Aqueduct, they needed to get $26.7 million, and they needed bond money to do that. How do you do that? Well, you accentuate the problem that the LA River is drying up. Now, the LA River, in actuality, was good for up to 250,000 people. Now that we look back, right now we have a little over 100,000, but LA Times now printed false rain reports saying, we're short of water, folks. We're going to have a problem real quick. And so the city passed an ordinance forbidding people to water their lawns. We've heard this happen here. This has happened here, we have odd, even days, remember those? But they really alarmed the people, and they had no problem, because of this, getting the folks of the city of Los Angeles to spend in excess of $24 million to build the LA Aqueduct from Owens River. They called it back then the Owens Aqueduct. Anyway, that's a heck of a lot of money for 100,000 people. In today's money, it's about $1 billion, but it had to be divided among 100,000 people. So it comes out to thousands of dollars per person in the city of Los Angeles to pay for this. That's a lot of money. And so I threw this map in here because this was 1917 from AAA. And it shows the three cities that the syndicate developed. And that was, they developed Van Nuys. They left Lancashire alone because Lancashire didn't sell this part of his land. Van Nuys, they used Van Nuys' name, his son-in-law, to build Van Nuys. Marion, who happens to be the wife or the daughter of the wife of Otis Chandler, by the name of Marion. And by the way, this later became Reseda, town of Reseda. And then Owensmouth. Why did they name it Owensmouth? Because they told everyone down here that the Owens Aqueduct, extension of the Owens River, would come down here. This would be the mouth of the Owens River. That's why they named it Owensmouth. Here's Calabasas on the map from 1917. By the way, here's another little known fact. The name of Van Owen was named Van Owen because it was a major street between Van Nuys, Van Owen, to Owensmouth. Van Owen, little known fact. And they named the main highway Sherman Way after Moses Sherman, who was part of the syndicate. So they had everyone covered in names on this one. So now they have enough money to build the LA Aqueduct. They send William Mulholland a self-made, self-taught engineer to survey it and build. They gave him enough money and enough equipment. I throw this in here because this is the first Caterpillar tractor ever used in 1907. And it was used for the LA Aqueduct. City was so impressed by these, they bought 26 of these Caterpillar trucks. Only one problem is they hit the Mojave Desert, and after months, they would fall apart. So they reverted back to donkeys. And here's a 50 mules that they used. And by the way, they didn't waste the tractor. They used it as forms for some of the concrete that they used, so they didn't waste it 100%. This shows you this, just the magnitude of the size of the pipe. I like that picture. They had over 5,000 men working from 1908 till 1913, so that's 5 years, building this great engineering marvel, which brought water from Owens Valley, a couple 100 miles down to LA, all on gravity feed. No pumps involved, all the way down here, and today is still being used. So here is a parking lot in the San Fernando Valley. This is right there where the Cascades are by the Golden State Freeway. And this was the largest gathering of cars ever to that point. This is November 5th, 1913. And they were there to see the opening of the LA Aqueduct. 35,000 people showed up. Not everyone had cars. You see these horse-drawn wagons and horses parked in the back over here, and a few motorcycles as well. So opening day, I'm getting close to the end here, folks. 35,000 people attended. Open up the gates. You still see the Cascades. You actually see two Cascades up here. This is the smaller one of the two that you see now. Fireworks, cannon would go off. They would see the water come down this towards the people and the stands over here. William Mulholland stood there and said, "There it is, take it." Famous saying. Here he is. Here's William Mulholland standing there watching the water. This is an actual picture of the original celebration of the LA Aqueduct being opened. So what happens? Well, with the opening of the LA Aqueduct, all of a sudden you have 4 times as much water as you needed for the 100,000 people in the city of Los Angeles. And what does that do? Well, that contributes to the growth of LA, because all these other cities all around LA, and including the entire San Fernando Valley, which was not part of LA, except of course Calabasas and the city of San Fernando, and I'll go into why. They all wanted to be annexed because, look, the ratepayers in the city of Los Angeles spent $26.5 million to build this, a lot of money. So they revised the city charter to say that we will not sell any of our water to outside cities, only to the people of the city of Los Angeles. So the other towns and cities knew about it. So they said, look, please annex us. We need water. We need consistent water. And that's what happened. This is how the city of LA grew, through annexations mainly. Here's the original footprint of LA back in 1905 or so, before the LA Aqueduct was built. Everything you see in yellow was annexed into the city of Los Angeles. There are a few cities here that did not go in. Calabasas, I don't think was a city back then, but San Fernando, Burbank, Glendale, Pasadena, Culver City, Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, and why? They had their own supply of water. They had either groundwater or they had their own streams from the San Gabriel Mountain. They had groundwater over here at Culver City. Remember the LA River used to come down over here into the Santa Monica Bay, right by the marina, for millions of years. So they had water there. Beverly Hills didn't have as much water, but they were so wealthy, they could import water. They did have wells. And whenever they dug, they found oil. So they became wealthier back then. But so from 1910 to 1930, LA's area increased almost threefold, from 115 square miles to 442 square miles. The San Fernando Valley alone almost tripled when they came into LA. They staggered coming into LA, but that almost tripled the size of LA when the San Fernando Valley came in. So was that enough water for the city of Los Angeles in Southern California? Nope. It didn't take long for population to increase. Let me tell you some of the additional water sources that we've come along with. First, the LA Aqueduct back in 1913 when it was completed. They had to build an extension to the LA Aqueduct and expand it over the 100 years. Then as soon as the area started growing, they knew they would need more water for this whole area here. And they formed the Metropolitan Water District. William Mulholland was involved in that as well. And he was involved with developing the Colorado River Aqueduct that brought water from actually the Colorado River, Hoover Dam, to this area here. And it was sold off by MWD to other cities. So that came about in 1930s. And then you had the California Aqueduct, which brought water down from the Bay Area. They have a surplus of water down there. And that was in the 1960s. Department of Water Resources of the state built it, but MWD, Metropolitan Water District, buys the water from there. And then you had another source, the local groundwater. There's a lot of groundwater here, more than people believe there is. Like in the valley, it's around Burbank area. It's where the LA River first, where the lake was, how do I put it? Where the water went into Glendale, the water sat there for millions of years in that deep end in the southeast portion of the San Fernando Valley, and developed a high water table. And there's plenty of water there. I mean, not plenty, but there's water there that adds to the formula, the mixture. And of course, recycled water. That's the talk nowadays. Calabasas has done an excellent job. I went to their water treatment plant, recycle plant. It's probably 20 years now. I'm sure that it was state of the art back then. And this is where everyone gets their water. Is it enough? That's a question. That's the question. So to sum this up, let me refresh your memory. When Portola first came and saw the Tongva village over there by Union Station, he said, and his diarist, Juan Crispy, said, this has all the requisites for a large settlement. And that prediction was given 7 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Think about that. And you know what? He was absolutely right. And the city was founded in 1781, grew from a humble pueblo into the second largest city in the United States. Population 4 million people. LA County, Calabasas, of which is part of, largest county in the United States, 10 million. Question is, are we going to have enough water for the future? That's the big question. And I can talk about that as soon as I finish and answer your question. Here's water. This is what made it all possible for the growth of Southern California. And it's our resource. I can almost taste the water now. I'm sipping on it. And the question is, will there be enough? And how do we get that water? And how do we keep it clean? That's the tough question that we have to face. It's an ongoing problem. And anyway, I'd be happy to talk about it. So